Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Amanda Artemisa Forrester, rune reader, diviner, and polytheist mystic. Happy summer solstice. This year the solstice is also on Father's Day, so happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. So once again, I wanted to make this video before the actual Sabbath, and I did not. I've been super busy, and I can give you a whole lot of excuses, but I didn't. So, at least I'm doing it now, and I'm just going to jump right into it. So, what's the summer solstice? The solstice is there's two solstices. So, the summer solstice is the longest day of the year and the shortest night. The winter solstice is the opposite. It is the longest night of the year and the shortest day. That would be Yule, which is usually a couple days before Christmas. So the Wiccan name for the summer solstice is Litha, and it's also called midsummer. So it's the counterpart to Yule. After today, the nights are going to slowly get longer, just a tiny bit, but it won't be noticeable for a long time, and we're going to start creeping towards the dark half of the year. I know for a lot of people that's a really depressing thought for people who don't like winter and cold and darkness, but you have to remember that this is a religion that is based in the cycles of nature, and the wheel is constantly turning. So we can enjoy where we're at, but it's never going to stay. And that's actually a comforting thought too, because it means when you're in a place that's not pleasant in your life, it's not going to stay like that forever either. The wheel just keeps turning. It's only modern life that makes things feel like this static sameness. It's a more natural focus to your life will show you that life speeds up in the summer and slows down in the winter, because winter is that fallow period where the crops are dormant and you're mostly staying inside trying to focus on survival. But the only constant in life is change, and we're all constantly becoming whatever our future selves are going to be. So as I said, time speeds up in the summer. If we think about farms and the way most of our ancestors lived, this was their busy season. Even the way the school year is set up now, it was to accommodate all the families that would need their kids to help out on the farms. Summer wasn't just for goofing off and having fun, although you would do that too, but it was actually when kids would be working the most, and they wouldn't have time to focus on homework and getting good grades because they would be working right now. And they would be working in the fields and preparing for harvest. So this is a busy time. This month is June, obviously, but you may or may not know that it was named for Juno, which is the Roman goddess of marriage, counterpart of Hera. Some argument, of course, whether she's exactly the same as Hera. Somewhat, the Etruscan gods, the original Latin gods, are very similar, but it kind of got all overlaid and smashed together. Anyway, for argument's sake, we're just going to say it's the Roman name for Hera. Anyway, there's a reason that we still have the idea of the whole June bride in our culture, and that so many marriages take place right now. This was a blessed month for marriages because it was sacred to Juno. Another festival that went on this month in the ancient world, in the Roman world, was the Vestalia, which was for Vesta or Hestia, very important goddess who sat in the center of Olympus and tended the sacred fire. And there we have fire, heat, the sun, warmth, the same theme that you see for the midsummer, which already passed because I'm making this late, but and that was almost a week from the 7th to the 13th, and then on the 15th the temple was closed for purification. And so the book that I'm always, when it comes to Roman stuff, that I'm always going to recommend, that I've recommended on this channel before, is Classical Living, Reconnecting with the Rituals of Ancient Rome. You can see that I've actually dog-eared the hell out of this and just worn it to shreds. This is actually my second copy because the first one just gave out. Yeah, so this is a good one. It's actually written by an archaeologist who became more religiously devoted to the gods when she started having dreams while working on excavating Pompeii. So the woman who wrote this knows her stuff. All right, so it's very, very good book. Okay, so gods that would be appropriate to honor today on the midsummer would obviously be, well, Juno and Vesta, as I've talked about, are good all month. But if you're coming from a Greek tradition, Helios or Apollo would be the sun gods. If you're working more with Norse, then Suna would be the goddess of the sun. And that brings up a whole interesting discussion about the genders that are traditionally associated with the sun and the moon in modern paganism. In modern paganism, we tend to think of the moon as being feminine and the sun as being masculine. And you will hear people who are new to the past, especially Wiccans, say that there are only sun gods and only moon goddesses. And that's just not true in the ancient world. I mean, the Japanese sun goddess is named Amaterasu. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly. I do not speak Japanese. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. But it's just not true. That idea does mostly come from the Greeks. Now in Egypt, almost all the gods have a sun aspect. That's a very sun-drenched country. They did, of course, have moon gods. I believe Thoth, Khonsu, and Min, and those were all male gods that were related to the moon. And it's kind of interesting that at least the two traditions I work with the most and therefore know the most about are the Hellenic, which is the Greek and Roman, and heathenry, which is the Norse gods. So those are the two that I know the most about. The other stuff I think I'm pretty well educated in, but I haven't had as much experience with, so I'm just putting that out there that those two are my traditions. Those are the two I'm working with. Those are the gods that I worship. Although I have had some experiences with Isis and Anubis as well. So I've got a little Egyptian in there. There's just a point where labels start to not matter as much anymore when you're actually a mystic and gods do what they want. They want who they want. Anyway, they're really, what was I saying? Yeah. What's really interesting is that, at least in the Norse tradition, Suna still has what we would consider in our culture masculine personality traits, although being feminine as a goddess. She still is very driven and task-focused and less emotional, I suppose. Whereas Mani, while being a male god, is very gentle, very sweet, a protector of children and those who have been abused, and more likely to get swept up in his emotions and make irrational decisions. So, and I know how that sounds. say it was relating the irrational to the feminine. But that, again, is a stereotype that comes from Greek philosophy. That is a Greek and Roman stereotype. Whereas in the Norse culture, it was the opposite assumption. They actually assumed that women had a more level head and that men were more likely to get swept away by their emotions. So it's not really a universal assumption. It's every culture sees certain patterns but slightly differently. To me, I think that these spirits, the sun and the moon, I don't think they have a gender. I think they manifest differently. I think if you look at the northern world, the Baltic sun goddess, that's a goddess. I can't remember her name. I think it's Sol. The Russians have a sun goddess. And if you think about it, it makes sense if you think about it in a life-giving sense. Because the northern world is very frozen and winter is a terrifying time. So if you think about gender as women as the givers of life, then to see the sun as feminine and warming and nurturing makes sense, right? Anyway, yeah, so back to the gods that would be appropriate to honor at this time. You could go with Helios, Apollo, Suna. I can go off on so many rants, I'm sorry. But hey, if it's a theme for Midsummer. Helios, Apollo, Suna, Amaterasu, almost any of the Egyptian gods. Ra, Horus, and Isis would probably be the most common and the most appropriate, but almost all of them have a sun aspect, except for the few that I named earlier. So some of the other associations, I'm trying to give you more practical stuff in this video, because before I've been talking very much about theory, and so I'm trying to give you enough to put together a ritual if you've never done that before. So sunflowers, obviously, daisies, roses, because roses are related to love and to feminine power, and that's love and fertility is a spring and summer thing. Marigolds, if you didn't know, because they're orange and red and bright and they look kind of like a sun, that sounds silly, but when you get into a symbolic, magical type of thinking, this is a completely different way of thinking. It's a mystic's mind. And in fact, one of the folk names for marigolds is Summer Bride. So that would be symbolic. Oak would be one of the woods that you could use. In fact, I believe it was traditional to use oak on the midsummer bonfires. It's also sacred to Zeus. I don't know if he was honored at midsummer specifically, but what he does have related to it, the Athenian New Year, this year it won't be until July 12th. But the Athenian New Year is lunar, and it is, I'm mentioning it now because the summer solstice is used in its calculation. So it would fall on the first Numinia after the summer solstice. I've mentioned this in another video several times, but in case this is the first of my videos you've seen, welcome to my channel. Numinia means new moon in ancient Greek, but it's not what we would think of as the new moon. What we think of today as the new moon is actually the dark moon, when it's completely black and blacked out, no light whatsoever. What the Greeks called the dark moon, the new moon, the Numinia, is 2 days after the astrological new moon. So I'm going to refer to the dark moon as the new moon and the Numinia as what they called Artemis's bow. That was 2 days after the new moon. Artemis's bow was that first little sliver of light in the sky. That's how the Greeks measured their months. And so they had a lunar calendar. So the Athenian New Year, the ancient Greek calendar, starts this year, July 12th, the next Numinia after the solstice, which is today. So congratulations, you now know, if my calculations are correct, then they should be. You now know the ancient Athenian New Year is July 12th this year. Alright, so the thing I was going to mention about oak, although this is not entirely historical, it is really in the pagan consciousness these days, is the whole Oak King and Holly King fighting it out at the equinoxes. That wouldn't be for a few more months, because the equinox is when the day and light is balanced. This would be when the Oak King is at his most power, which, it is traditional to burn oak in the midsummer bonfires. But this comes from Robert Graves' books, The White Goddess. But since then his scholarship has been somewhat refuted, it's at least half fantasy. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful story, but we don't really... It's kind of like Lord of the Rings, okay? It's a beautiful story, and you can see some elements of truth in it, but it's not really all that historical. And, it's not really... It's just like James Fraser and the Golden Brow. He wrote it in the 1940s. But it's been hugely influential on British traditional Wicca, and that formed the basis of the modern pagan revival. So it is kind of important, because you'll still see the influence of the whole battle between the Oak King and the Holly King for dominion over the year, which the Oak King would be the soul of power and the growth, regeneration, whereas at the autumn equinox, he would lose the battle to the Holly King, who would then rule the dark half of the year. Not really a whole lot of historical basis in that, but it's still a beautiful story, and there's a lot. There's some worth there, and there's also some evidence to it. Again, I've even though it's Llewellyn and that's not the best, there's still some really good stuff, and it's got some great rituals in Llewellyn's Midsummer book. I have the whole Sabbath series. It's a good place to start. I'm running out of time. There's not as much space on this phone as my old one. Alright, good thing to do on the solstice would be anything out in nature. I did a little bit of gardening today. Now, I did not do this today, but I've done it on other solstices, is to wake up early, go out and watch the sunrise, light a stick of incense, meditate, pour out a libation, and do sun salutation yoga poses as the sun is rising. It's especially if you're sensitive to energy, to actually feel the energy of the sun pouring over you as you do that. It's an incredible way to cleanse. Really. It's a great way to focus. And it might have been more for me because I'm a Leo and I'm ruled by the sun astrologically. But I highly recommend it if you can force yourself to wake up in the morning. Someday that's not so easy. I'm going to admit that. And I miss having a private backyard. Where I'm at right now, I don't really have a private backyard, and I don't really want to go out and do yoga poses by the road. But, oh well. So, that's something else that you can do, which, if I had made this in time, which I did not. I've only got 3 minutes left. Okay, something else. A book that I'm going to recommend specifically for Suna This is a devotional, so it's got a lot of poetry, essays, personal stories. And I know I'm constantly recommending stuff that's organized by Galina Kraskova, but there's just not a lot of heathen stuff out there. So I think she's great. And there's just not well-researched heathen stuff out there. So, another devotional by Galina Krasikova. She's not the only one who's written in this. It's actually collected by a lot of different people, which is why I like anthology. Daystar and Whirling Wheel, a devotional to Suna, goddess of the sun, and Mani, goddess of the moon. So, this has prayers in it. I think it's got rituals. It's been a while since I've looked at this. I've got a lot of books. It's not hoarding if it's books. I'm actually trying to rebuild my library. I've had a few personal disasters where I lost my library, and some of my expensive scholarly books that are hard to get a hold of, I lost. So I'm very disappointed about that. But anyway, I am just about out of time here, but I'm really trying to get back into the swing of doing the longer videos about the actual holidays and the rituals and the stuff that you can do as you're exploring this path. So, this has been Amanda Artemisa Forrester, rune reader, diviner, and polytheist mystic, signing off, and I hope that you have a wonderful solstice and a beautiful Father's Day, and the sun is also moving into Cancer season, so happy Cancer season, just happy all around, and I am really glad to be back and creating more content. So I will be back when I have time around my crazy schedule. Skull.